Evening. Thank everybody for coming out and welcome. I'm Larry Welcome, the president of the World Affairs Council of Greater Hampton Roads, of which, believe it or not, next year we're going to be celebrating our 50th anniversary here in Hampton Roads, serving this community. And we're one of about 98 councils throughout America in over 40 states. Affiliated in the World Affairs Council of America, and it's the largest nonprofit, nonpartisan international affairs organization in the country. And our mission is to engage thought leaders, change makers, policy leaders, and bring them into our community to share ideas, to learn from programs such as these, and to engage in conversations on global issues. So it's a mission that's never been more important than it is today. And all you have to do is look at what's going on in the world to understand that. Through our programs, we hope to provide our community, our citizens, and especially our students, the knowledge you need to be better informed citizens, to make better decisions, and in your choices and actions in the future as they relate to global issues and the international environment, which is very important here in Hampton Roads. And I think you'll agree that this program and the topic this evening could not be timelier, and it could not feature a more important speaker than what we have tonight. We're proud to co-host this event with Old Dominion University, and specifically the Churn College of Business. ODU has been a sponsor and a supporter of the World Affairs Council here in Hampton Roads for many years, and has been instrumental in bringing the program to you this evening. I'd like to especially thank also Ms. Maria Zamas for helping to arrange our speaker and doing a lot of the legwork behind making this program happen. She's a past president of our council and also a past vice chairman of the World Affairs Councils of America. We want to thank the City of Norfolk for their generous grant, which helps us put on these programs, as well as our corporate sponsors, and specifically folks here from Penrod, an international organization, Bay Diesel, and many others that you see in your program tonight. We're proud also to announce that Norfolk State University will soon be joining us as a partner and sponsor as well. So thank you, and welcome aboard. And now I'd like to introduce our host for this evening, the Dean of the Churn College of Business, Dr. Jeff Tanner, who will introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Tanner.
When I was trying to get ready, to introduce our illustrious speaker, I went looking for the bio, and I went to Wikipedia, and he has got one of the longest Wikipedia entries I've ever seen. And I was so envious. That would be a great goal in life for you young people to have a Wikipedia entry that's not only long but meaningful. And that's the other thing is that he has been an invaluable contributor all across his career to a number of presidents and others. For example, at the tender age of 27, he was deputy director under Henry Kissinger. I want to make sure I get this right. Foreign economics and part of the National Security Council. He has written 47 books, and as someone who has written books, I know that is an incredible labor of love about whatever the topic is you're working on, and to do it 47 times, I cannot imagine. His 47th book should be wrapped up by the end of the year and out early part of next year, and it's on the trade with China, correct? And so that's something to look forward to. But I also thought it was interesting that USA Today listed him as one of the 10 people who can change your life. Now, my son came back from Africa one time and he said, "It changed my life." I said, "Son, you're 23, you haven't had a life." And so I'm anxious to find out how our lives will be changed tonight by having you with us. The bar is now high, the floor is now yours. Thank you so much.
Jeff, thank you very much for the kind introduction, including for some things you did not say. It's true that USA Today called me one of the 10 people who could change your life, along with the guy who invented the internet, not Al Gore, along with the guy who discovered the hole in the ozone that led to the carbon HCFC treaty. But the full quote said, one of the 10 people who could change your life that you never heard of. Unfortunately, the second half of the quote is probably more accurate than the first half of the quote. The other thing was, you rightly said, I was economic deputy to Henry Kissinger at an early age. The young people here won't get this point, but the older folks will. I was once introduced being economic deputy to Henry Kissinger. That was a little like being military advisor to the Pope. Kissinger is famously ignorant of economic issues. And I told that Kissinger and I are very good friends. We're having lunch again next month. He's 95, he's still going strong. I told that story one time when I was on a program with him a couple years ago. And he got up and said, Fred says being my economic deputy was being military advisor, I just call him back. He said, and Fred went on to have a distinguished career in the Carter administration, something quite difficult to have achieved. So, if you, Henry got the last word. It's a great pleasure to be with you all here at Hampton Roads in Norfolk. I'm joined by my lovely wife, Jenny, here tonight with me. Our son, Mark, who runs the inpatient rehab center at Centera General Hospital, just down the street from whence he came to work tonight. And his lovely wife, Suzanne, who does occupational therapy at a number of the hospitals in the area, including Centera. So they're very active participants in your community here at Hampton Roads. And we're always very proud and pleased to visit them and to have a chance to meet with a group like this here. My topic tonight is, as the program says, trade wars and global disruption. And we are indeed, as of this week, in the midst of the first trade wars since the 1930s. Now, if that strikes you as daunting, it is. Because the trade wars in the 1930s had a huge amount to do with the Great Depression and the subsequent onset of the Second World War. And with this week's escalation of the trade conflict with China, we are definitely into trade war territory, assuming it actually comes to fruition as it's scheduled to do in the next couple of weeks. It doesn't get resolved and headed off sometime before all that is. So it's a deeply serious, indeed I would say existential situation. It's a threat to disruption of the world economy, but also a threat to disruption of America's role in the world. President Trump, and I don't blame him totally, and I'll elaborate on that, but President Trump has essentially abdicated America's global leadership role. He's attacked our allies, Europeans, Canada, who's fought with us at every war, Australia, Japan, Korea, countries that all of you here involved in NATO, NORAD, military establishment in the United States have worked with so closely for the past 50 years. The President has attacked our allies as well as our challengers like China, which I'll address most of our remarks. But that raises deep, deep problems for global peace and security, American foreign policy, America's role in the world. So these are deeply troubling times, deeply critical and difficult issues. And I want to spend a little time talking about them tonight. Now, just to be clear at the start, I'm not talking about a new global financial crisis. We had a huge one 10 years ago. There are some unsettling possibilities, a few emerging markets, Turkey, Argentina are going off the rails, but I don't think that's going to lead to any widespread contagion like it did 10 or 20 years ago. The U.S. has a huge and irresponsible budget deficit. We're going to start running $1 trillion budget deficits next year, as far as the eye can see, at a time when the economy is running strong and at full employment, and we should be running budget surpluses. So the next time we do get into a crisis, we're not going to have much ammunition to deal with it. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. That's going to raise problems as well, both for us and around the world. So there are some disquieting signs out there, but I'm not tonight talking about a global financial crisis. I think our economy is for the moment strong. It will continue that way for the next 2 or 3 years. We'll undoubtedly have a recession, at least a mild one, sometime within the next few years. But I don't see anything cataclysmic on that front, unless the trade wars and things I am talking about spill over into investor sentiments, spill over into deterring investment by American and foreign firms around the world, and therefore put a damper on global economic growth and economic activity in a broad way. What I am talking about is 2 big shocks to the global economy, the global situation more broadly, which for shorthand I'll call the Trump shock and the China shock. And the 2 interact in very profound and complicated and deep-seated ways, which raise very fundamental issues and challenges to our foreign policy, our economic policy for the indefinite future. Now, the Trump shock, as I say, is a basic attack on the precepts that have underlain the global economic order basically for the last 75 years. For all its shortcomings, we've had a world economy based on free trade, open investment, pretty open capital flows. Again, lots of warts, lots of shortcomings. The system hasn't been perfect by any means. But it has provided a fundamental framework within which the world has had an unparalleled period of peace and prosperity. Our own economic growth and rise in standard of living has been unprecedented in history over these last 50, 60, 70 years. Yes, we have problems with income distribution. Yes, we have problems with stagnant wages. Yes, we have lots of difficulties, but we do have the richest, highest income society in the world, and it's been that way for quite a while. Whether it will continue in the face of all this is a question, but we've certainly achieved it in part because of this global economic framework. And we've basically had peace. Now, many of you here in Norfolk, many of you have been in the military, you know that peace has not been perfect either. Lots of skirmishes, lots of small wars, lots of conflict, lots of casualties. But we've avoided any kind of global confrontation or conflict of the type that dotted the first half of the 20th century and was so devastating during that period. So, in broad terms, it's been a period of peace and prosperity. That's been rooted in 2 fundamentals. One has been the military strength of the United States. The willingness and ability of the United States to essentially defend freedom and maintain a stable global economic military situation where no one dared attack. Even through the Cold War with the Soviet Union, nothing happened. The situation was finally resolved with the fall of communism and the Soviet Union itself. The other pillar, and that's the one I focus on, is the global economic system. The global economic order based on relatively free trade, international institutions, cooperative mechanisms among the allies, but with a wide swath of developing and emerging market countries as well, to organize and manage the global economy in a way that did bring unparalleled prosperity. Over this period of globalization, 2 to 3 billion people around the world were brought out of poverty. Many of those in China, many of those in India, Indonesia, the Middle East, but many in high-income countries as well, Europe, in East Asia, and many in the United States itself. All that made possible by a world of open borders, relatively open trade, international investment, multinational corporations, and the like. So that has been a central pillar of the world order, and it is now under direct attack. And that is why the issue is so serious. Now, as I said, the global order has not been perfect. We call it, shorthand terms, the liberal international order. Some say it really wasn't so liberal because there were lots of barriers. Some say it was not so international because it was dominated by the United States. Some say it was not actually so orderly because there were a lot of crises. All of which is true to some extent. Nor do I want to blame all this on President Trump. He's been the most extreme, crude, overleaning version of what's happened. But in fact, U.S. global competitiveness has been eroding for at least a couple of decades. U.S. global leadership has been eroding for a couple of decades. And it's not just President Trump that has opposed free trade, markets, open immigration, and the like. The Democrats, to put it bluntly, are not much better. In fact, the Democrats take credit, if that's the right word, not Senator Warner, fortunately, but many Democrats take credit for blocking the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the big Trans-Pacific Agreement that President Obama negotiated. But his own party in the Congress takes credit, if that's the right word, for blocking, turning it down. And the 2016 campaign, you will recall, both parties, in some sense, competed with each other. Bernie Sanders was as much as Donald Trump, opposing globalization, raising questions and all that. So it's not a purely Trumpian phenomenon. And that raises the fundamental question, both for us right-thinking Americans, I would like to think we are, but also the rest of the world, whether this is a passing phenomenon. You know, is it going to purely come and go with President Trump, or is it going to persist? Well, I suspect it would be a little less extreme, a little less violent than under President Trump. But the fundamental strains of withdrawal, isolationism, protectionism, to some extent, may well survive. And that adds then to the risk to the global system, maintaining the kinds of benefits of the past that I've talked about. Now, when I say the benefits of the past, what do I mean for the United States? To be sure, underlying some of these political criticisms of globalization and free trade is some reality. Because like any dynamic economic change, free trade causes dislocations and disruptions. And when markets force changes in trade patterns, like when robots force changes in technology patterns, some jobs are lost and some jobs are gained. And some sectors benefit and some sectors lose. But the question from a national standpoint, of course, is what is the balance of all that? Now, we've done intense studies at my institute, which is by far the top think tank in the world on these issues. And we have demonstrated, and president after president, secretary of Treasury after secretary of Treasury, and U.S. trade representatives have cited these as gospel, that the U.S. economy today is about $2 trillion per year better off as a result of the globalization of the last 75 years. $2 trillion per year better off. Now, our economy is $20 trillion, big economy. But that's about 10%. About 10% of the benefits that all of us as citizens and households have achieved has been due to this opening up of markets, trade, investment, and the like. That's about $10,000 per household. It's about 10% of total national income, which is not bad. And since there's still a lot of barriers out there, there's still another $500 billion to $1 trillion to be gained from further opening up of the world economy. The process is by no means over and not to be taken for granted or complacent. So there have been huge gains. Now, as I say, the gains have come with some losses. And the figure I mentioned, $2 trillion, is a net figure. It nets out some losses, which we estimate at something like $50 billion per year of job dislocation, lower wages, adverse effects on the losers from the globalization process. And there certainly are such losers. Now note that $2 trillion to $50 billion is a ratio of something like 40 to 1. So the benefit-cost ratio is enormously positive. And that's why every president, every Congress at the end of the day, despite all complaints, have supported this system for the last 75 years. But there are some costs. And those costs have now built up to a point where one of the great failings of American policy has come home to roost. Under neither party, neither president, neither side of Congress, have we as a country been willing to deal effectively with the problems caused by globalization for those segments of society that have lost money. Because, as I said, some people did lose jobs. Some people did take hits to their lifetime income. Some people were forced to move and lose homes and have adverse effects, and communities were disrupted. So there have been adverse effects. No two ways about it. No doubt. No debate about that. What every other major country in the world has done is to deal with those problems directly and more or less effectively. What you do is recognize you've got a $2 trillion pot of gains. And so all you need to do is devote some tiny portion of that to deal with the downsides, the costs, the losers. In addition to being humane, that enables you to maintain a domestic political foundation to keep the open policy going and maintain the benefits. But we haven't done it. The very people who support free trade the most, to be very precise, congressional Republicans, have been the most hostile toward government programs that might help the losers adjust to get new jobs and better jobs through better training and education and worker rehab programs, or to provide compensation to the losers. More generous unemployment insurance, trade adjustment assistance, better health care, the kinds of things that legitimately people thrown out of work by globalization or robots or anything else feel that they might lose. Now, I'm making this comparison with robots purposely because nobody says stop robots. A few people do, but very few people say stop robots, stop automation, stop technology. Very few people say that, even though they know that it is disruptive as well. It's easier to say stop globalization because then you can blame it on the foreigners. Well, of course it's not the foreigners. It's ourselves who pay, and I'll describe that when we back away from globalization. It's we who would pay. But it's easy politically to blame the foreigners. Of course, President Trump does that to a fair degree. So that's the political difference between technology change and globalization. Even though in economic terms, they have very similar effects, very similar dynamics, and create very similar balance sheets, winners and losers. Now, it's also important to keep in mind the scale of the dislocation I'm talking about. As I said, something like $50 billion a year of losses, particularly mainly to workers, some to firms, communities, but mainly to workers who are adversely affected by free trade flows. That equates to something like 100 to 200,000 workers per year adversely affected. 100 to 200,000 per year. The average labor churn in the U.S. job market is 2 to 3 million workers per month. In other words, the natural dynamics of our labor force, voluntary quits, factory closing, all sorts of motivations for change in economic performance, create enormous turnover in the labor market. Our total labor force is now about 150 million workers. And as much as a quarter of that literally turns over every year. Now that's a gross figure. Most of those people get reemployed pretty quickly. Some take 6 months, maybe longer. But it's a huge churn. So when we say 100 to 200,000 per year lose jobs as a result of trade, it's tiny. It's a minuscule fraction. So even if you were inclined to go down an anti-globalization path, you would be doing very, very little to deal with the economy's problems. You would be making, at most, a marginal impact on what ails us and what concerns us legitimately as Americans in dealing with these issues. So that's kind of the state of play for globalization today. So now comes what I call the Trump shot, which is basically an assault on this whole system of open trade and investment. President Trump basically wants to destroy NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Basically, it's declared a war on our European allies, NATO allies, but major, most important trading partners, the whole European Union, including the United Kingdom. Is a major war with China, which has a security dimension as well. I'm going to come back to that. But Canada, our closest ally, our closest neighbor, our biggest trading partner, our longest-standing free trade agreement partner, Canada is actually number 2 in the gun sights of the White House, second only to China. Why is all that? Well, there's all sorts of motives, political as well as misguided economics, both. But the fact is that trade wars have been launched essentially from all directions. At the end, I'm going to come back and give you a little bit of good news before I close, because it's a long move to do. Because there are now a few incremental signs that maybe it's beginning to turn in a less disastrous direction, but it's still very possible it could, so I'm going to stick with it. So what would it mean if these trade wars actually happen? Well, I'm going to assume not even a worst case scenario, but a full $500 billion of 25% tariffs against China, which is what the president is now threatening. Tariffs on the whole automobile sector, which he has threatened, and could do as early as October. 25% tariff on all cars coming into the country. Already steel and aluminum tariffs on most of our trading partners, plus a couple of little sectors. And a possible breakup of the whole North American agreement, which is the integrated economy with our closest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. What would all that add up to? Keep in mind that not only is this terrible policy, for the reason I've been saying, but it happens at the worst possible time. The U.S. economy is booming. It's at full employment. Our unemployment rate is below what most economists have thought is really full employment. It raises inflation risks and all that. Unfortunately, we haven't seen much. But the economy is strong and booming. I was on the Kathy Lewis radio program yesterday, I know some of you heard it. And the first question came from a small business owner who said, you know, my problem is I can't find workers. I can't get anybody to come and fill my business. I got lots of orders, but I can't find workers. And you're having that all over the country. In other words, the problem is not creating jobs, which is the objective of trade protectionism. It's finding workers to fill jobs. If the protectionism, by some crazy possibility, were to succeed, it would simply make our problem worse. Because open up new job opportunities when we don't have enough people to fill the existing job opportunities. So what does that mean? Inflation. So if we get this trade war outcome, it's going to push inflation up by at least half a percentage point to a full percentage point a year. That means the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates another full half to 1 or more percentage points a year. That's going to dampen the economy and could even push us into that next recession that I don't see happening. Otherwise, it could very well happen. Now, beyond those static effects, as we economists call it, tangible effects, come the more intangible spillover effects, unquantifiable, unpredictable, to investor psychology. If the trade wars really get going, as I suggest today, then the whole premise on which the post-war economic and social order is based, which I described, would be put at risk. And that's going to shape and maybe shatter investor confidence. And that would then have a very, very big effect on the whole economy, the world economy, and could cause a precipitous turnaround in our economic fortune. So those are the stakes on the economic side. I've already mentioned on the foreign policy side, going to war with your allies is not very smart, particularly if you have a serious economic problem, which is China. You want to have your allies with you and work with them to try to confront the problem of all the same economy of China. But to the contrary, the president, by attacking our allies, is undermining this coalition that could otherwise help, and I think make a decisive difference in dealing with what I'll now describe in prototype, which is the China shock. By the China shock, I do not mean our trade imbalance with China. I don't even mean our problems with China's unlevel playing field, barriers, and restrictions. Those are serious problems. They have to be dealt with. But the bigger problem is the contest for global economic leadership in the 21st century. Because that is the existential challenge posed by China to the United States. On many metrics, China is already a bigger economy than the United States. China's per capita income is only about a fourth ours. The average Chinese has a per capita income of about $15,000, ours is about $60,000. But of course, there are more than 4 times as many Chinese as there are Americans. And so, in economic terms, China is already bigger. They're a bigger trading country than we are. But the crucial point is they're growing 3 times as fast. China's growing about 6% a year. Our long-term growth potential is about 2. We're now growing at 3. That's great. It might continue another quarter or 2, but our long-term growth rate on everybody's projections is 2. But even if we grew at 3, they'd be growing twice as fast. More likely they're growing 3 times as fast. I gave you a paper that I presented to a conference Monday of this week. We had a big conference at my institute with the top think tank from China, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, CAS, who wanted to come over and have a day-long session, a public session, with us, several hundred people talking about this current crisis. And I gave a keynote talk. And in it, I've got some charts that compare the growth outlook, the economic profile of China and the United States over the next 20 or 30 years. And if you look at those curves, you will see that China doubles, on some metrics triples the United States in economic terms over the next several decades. In other words, China is not only already an economic superpower, it's going to outdistance us enormously. Now you might say, if that's the case, how have we hung on so long already? And that's back to the Allies. Because the United States is what economists call the global hegemon, meaning the dominant player. And we have led what we call the hegemonic coalition. The U.S. has had more or less faithful and cohesive allies in Europe, Japan, Korea, Canada, Australia, various points around the world. And I've got lines in my graphs there which show that when you combine the coalition with the United States, it doubles our economic economy. Because all those countries taken together have an economy about equal in size to ours. And so that doubles our share of the world. And when you project it out, as I do in those charts, it extends out by another couple of decades. The leadership of the incumbent coalition vis-a-vis the rise in China. And that's, again, why maintaining the alliances and the coalition is so important. If we keep them, then we've got a lot more time to get our act together and get things back on train and to work something out with the rise in China. But if we lose them, it becomes a much more immediate and urgent problem and a much more dire situation for us. So, with China rising like that, what does it all mean? Well, there is in history something called the Thucydides trap, which relates to the rise of Athens challenging Sparta way back in the day, which has become a metaphor for the inherent conflict between the incumbent power and the rising power. and the risk that there will be inherent clash, even military clash, between them. There are learned historical examples on both sides of the equation. For example, in the late 19th century, when Imperial Germany was rising, the incumbent power of the day, Great Britain, resisted, tried to hold them off, tried to restrain them, and the result was the First World War. In the 1930s, when the United States had become a superpower, Japan was rising. The U.S. tried to hold it down, wouldn't sell them oil, wouldn't sell them resources, tried to block them going away. And the result was Pearl Harbor and the Second World War. So there have been instances where the clash of rising and incumbent powers hasn't really led to war. There have been other examples where it hasn't been so bad, like when Great Britain finally petered out in the 20s and 1930s and was replaced by the United States. That was a peaceful transition, but it led to another problem, what we call the Hindenburg trap, after an old professor of mine who actually coined the idea. Hindenburg's thesis was that the Great Depression of the 1930s was caused by the transition of great powers at that time. His thesis, which has a lot of historical merit, is that the global economic order can only succeed if there is a leader who will maintain global public goods to keep the system perfect. Open markets for trade, lending to debtor countries, and particularly financial assistance in crises to avoid meltdowns like we saw in 2008 when the U.S. temporarily buckled in that function. Now, the U.S. has mainly carried out that role in the post-war period. That's one reason for the successful era of globalization that I described earlier. But in the 1930s, Britain, exhausted by the First World War, exhausted by the Depression, was no longer able to lead as it had all through the 19th century. The United States was the up-and-coming power, but was not yet willing to lead. And in some echoes of today, actually took a protectionist and negative stance. The smooth-volley tariff, the dollar devaluation of 1933, all sorts of things that the U.S. did that actually made the global situation worse, and according to the Hindenburg thesis, drove the war into depression. So you've got two big risks. Thucydides' trap, rising power, incumbent power, clashing in the military sense. Hindenburg trap, even if it doesn't go that far, will the rising powers be willing and able to take up the leadership mantle? So today the analogy obviously is China. With the United States, at least in relative terms, declining. I don't think the U.S. is in the absolute decline. In fact, we've done better than Europe and Japan over the last 20 years. But as I say, China is rising like a meteor. So China is clearly the rising power vis-a-vis us and everybody else. So comes the question, in this period ahead, will we see a replication, not the Thucydides trap, but less a risk, of the 1930s, where the U.S. is no longer able or particularly willing to provide global economic leadership. And China is not yet either able or willing. So then you open up several possibilities. Back to the Trump shock. You can view the Trump shock, and I think I already said that, as among other things, an abdication of U.S. global leadership. Indeed, plunging the dagger into the heart of many of the fundamental norms and precepts of global economic and social order. It's an anti-leadership mode. So the U.S. is abdicating. And if nothing else, that opens up a big factor of global leadership. The only potential successor is China. So that raises the question of what do the Chinese want? Well, as I said before, with our coalition and our alliances, we think there's at least a couple more decades of this. So most people have thought, I'm writing a book on that, most people have tended to think that this is a long-term, gradual evolutionary process. Yes, China's going to become a bigger and bigger player. It's inevitably going to play a key and central role, but it's a gradual evolutionary thing. But now come the two shocks. Trump advocates, and Xi Jinping takes over in China, becomes dictator for life, and has very ambitious goals for China's global order. So the question becomes, does China make what I call a dash for dominance and try to fill the vacuum and move quickly? And that then poses three possible scenarios for where the world is going, on which I will quit. The first is we do wind up in this situation with a leaderless world, what we sometimes call a G0. You know, you've got G, G7, G20, G10. So a G0, no leader. And the risk of replicating the situation in the 1930s, where nobody provides the global public goods, and things could go badly off the rails. A G0U, a G0 that's unstable. On the other hand, the more optimistic take would be that, yes, a G0, but it could be stable. Because after all, we've had this buildup of 70 years. We've got strong international institutions, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, etc. We've got a lot of rules-based systems. We've got a lot of countries that behave according to global norms, avoid trade protection, avoid beggar thy neighbor policy. And so, could the rest of the world, absent U.S. leadership, keep the system going? So far, the evidence is actually pretty good. Trump pulled out the Paris Agreement on climate change. The rest of the world went ahead. Nobody else dropped out. It's going ahead. Trump dropped out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership under the leadership of Japan. The rest of the countries went ahead. They're about to put in place a revised Trans-Pacific Partnership, and lots of other countries are clamoring to join. The European Union and Japan, second and third biggest economies in the world, worked out a new free trade agreement between themselves, which among other things discriminated against the U.S., hurts the U.S. economy, but means that the world trading system keeps moving forward. So there is some evidence, at least so far, within a couple of years, but so far, that the rest of the world is stepping up. China will have a big say in whether that happens. China has been a huge beneficiary of this globalization process and the open trading system. That system has been a major impetus to their global growth, a lot of which has been based on trade expansion, exploiting the U.S. and other foreign markets. So China has a huge stake in the global system and realizes that. And in crunch times, like 10 years ago, the global financial crisis, China has actually stepped up and played a leadership role along with the U.S. in order to keep the system going and avoid disruption. At the same time that it benefits from the system and has stepped up to support it, China cheats like that. China cheats like that. Violates the rules, the norms, the procedures of the system when it has felt it had an advantage of doing so. In other words, China has tried to get the best of all possible worlds and has felt that it could get away with it. For a long time, China viewed itself as a small country, too small under the radar. Obviously, that's no longer the case, and the Chinese man was calculating, and certainly Trump has jumped them for their behavior and has tried to rectify it in ways that I think are ineffectual, will not work, actually drive China into a corner and counterproductive. But the Chinese have prompted by their own action some of this pushback, which is now raising the threat to globalization. So that is where we are poised at the moment. Suppose the G0 did turn out to be unstable. What might happen? Well, one possibility is a new G1, led by China. If the U.S. continues to advocate, continues to attack its own allies, continues to withdraw from the world, the vacuum is there, and particularly if new crises hit, the rest of the world may seek a new leader to step in and fill that vacuum. And the only possibility is China. So a new G1 is a possibility. I've got a chapter in my new book called An International Economic Order with Chinese Characteristics. What would a world led by China, or substantially influenced by China, look like? Well, you couldn't be totally different because it would be grafted onto a system that's existed for 70 years ago. But it would be much less market-oriented and more centrally driven. It would be much less rule of law and much more driven by government fiat and sovereign concerns, that kind of thing. Much less democratic, more authoritarian, and political reputation. It would be quite uncomfortable in many ways controlling itself. And there are trends around the world already that are moving in that direction. China's rise has already pulled some countries into its own policies and abilities. And you may notice a lot of things that President Trump does here are actually quite better than China. Tom Friedman of the New York Times had a very perceptive op-ed about 3 months ago called "Are We Becoming Too Like China?" in which he traced a number of steps and approaches that are going on here in the United States now that are actually emulating many of the Chinese traits that we sometimes do. So what's the right outcome of all this? I know, of course, the right conclusion. It's not a G0, which would be unsafe. It's not a G1, which would raise all the problems. It's a G2. So what you really want, and I think the logic inevitably pushes both countries toward, is a G2 between China and the United States, where the two global economic superpowers, both with huge stakes in the system, both with huge desires to avoid war, the Thucydides trap, huge desires to avoid disruption of the world economy, that never works, find ways to do that. And it's not so fanciful as it sounds, because there's been lots of G2 activity over the last 10 years. President U.S., President China met virtually every quarter for the last several years. There are over 100 working groups between U.S. and Chinese at all levels, all ranges of international economy. There's been close collaboration in fighting the global financial crisis 10 years ago, in reaching a climate change agreement in 2015. President Obama was still on. So there have been instances of G2 collaboration, obviously nothing like a complete meeting of minds of the kind I'm suggesting. But I think it's feasible, desirable, and it's probably the most desirable, and maybe the only really sustainable outcome down the line. Well, as I promised, and I spoke, yeah, I wanted to just close with a couple of quick pieces of good news, so you won't go away thinking all this is doing away. 3 or 4 points. There is a domestic backlash against the Trump administration. The protectionist measures that have already been taken and are threatened and are now escalating have led a lot of the supporters of globalization who have stayed pretty quiet and maybe didn't even know how much they benefited from it, to come out of the woodwork. So we are now seeing pushback against pushback, and that's encouraging to see what comes of the district elections, to see what happens after that. But that, I think, is an encouraging sign. As I said, the rest of the world has been proceeding without the indispensable nation of the United States. Without the U.S., most of these things have gone ahead, and that's very positive. And I include China in that category. The economy continues to grow, and even the president may be moderating a bit. He's agreed with the Europeans now to a truce in that trade war. They're negotiating. They may be looking for a new trade agreement. NAFTA now may be headed toward a resolution. We don't quite know. We'll know in the next week. So there are some relatively positive signs that suggest things may be back in the right direction. But the risks are huge. They still could go off the rail with a tweet tomorrow morning. Flip of the switch. Things get so volatile in policy terms now. And I think they have to be posed, have to be considered, and I look forward to continuing to talk with you, all of you here at Hampton Roads, about them over the coming months and years. Thanks for everything.
We do have time for a few questions before we end tonight, so why don't we, if you got one, raise your hand and we'll get on with it. Yes, sir. And speak up if you can.
I'll do my best. I'd like to ask you a hypothetical. If we dropped all of our tariffs Chinese economy?
Well, the Chinese economy would gain enormously if we dropped all our tariffs, but our economy would gain more. The myth is that the country that liberalizes trade loses. In fact, it's the country that liberalizes trade that gains, improves its competitive position, avoids inflation pressure, creates jobs. I could go into great detail on all that. So it would be a big winner. As I said, the Europeans have been very clever. The Europeans heard Trump at the G7 summit back in June in Canada. Sort of an offhand line said, well, why don't we just get rid of all these tariffs and go to free trade? The Europeans were very clever. They came back a month later and said, yeah, let's go to free trade. Let's get rid of all tariffs, all non-tariff barriers, all subsidies. Trump had to agree. That's what created the ceasefire or truce and trade war between the U.S. and Europe. And they're actually on a path now where they might negotiate a new free trade agreement. So it's a key question. All countries would gain. There would, as I said, be some disruption. There would be some losers in all countries from the process. But if we could turn it around in that direction, that would be a huge winner.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bergsten, I wanted to come back to your layout of the Kindleberger trap, where there's a question of China's ability and willingness to step up to the plate and provide the kind of global public goods that will keep the system intact. It seems to me that they've made a number of admirable efforts to date. They're eager to have the renminbi to be a reserve currency, and a number of central banks have responded. They've seized egregious manipulation of currency values. They're providing global infrastructure finance for the Belt and Roads Initiative, albeit not as transparently as we'd like. They've set up a number of independent development banks, including the BRICS Bank, to address global needs. They've presented themselves as the savior, as the protector of the global free trade system. What makes you think that China is not ready to step up to the plate?
Everything you said is right, but you might have added that the United States opposed almost every one of those steps by China. In my view, hugely erroneously, because for 10 years or more, we've been calling on China to become a responsible stakeholder in the world economy. And they have taken steps in that direction. And yet when they did, and this was the Obama administration, not Trump, basically opposed them on grounds that China was trying to eat our lunch, take over our role, as opposed to recognizing that there has to be an assimilation, an integration of China into the global leadership structure. So everything you said is right. China has stepped up. I mentioned going back to the Asian financial crisis in 1997. They avoided devaluing their currency, which could have transformed it into a real global conflagration. They were very responsible. In 2008, they stimulated their economy more strongly than we did, got the world out of the global financial crisis. Lots of positive steps. But why do I think they're not ready? Because there have been so many steps on the other side of the equation. And all the complaints that the administration now launches, overstated and poorly pursued as they are, have some real truth. China does steal intellectual property to the tune of somewhere between $100 billion and $500 billion per year. China does force foreign firms to transfer their technology to Chinese firms and government in order to get access to the Chinese market. China does conduct cyber espionage for commercial purposes. Everybody spies. We spy. Everybody spies. But they spy for commercial purposes to try to add to the transfer of technology to their firm. China extends subsidies, particularly to state-owned enterprise, that provide a very unlevel playing field and therefore disadvantage the rest of the world. Those are areas where China, as I put it bluntly, cheats, violates the rules of the game, violates in many cases its own commitments, and therefore threatens the global economic order on which it is so reliant. So it's a kind of Jekyll and Hyde situation. There are positive steps, which we have not reciprocated very well. But there are other steps that do need to be remediated unless the situation is deteriorating further. Now, I view those, that's the thrust of the paper that I gave you that I presented earlier this week, I view those as systemic issues because they all reflect the different economic systems between the U.S. and China. Ours is basically a market-oriented democratic system. China's basically, though it's marketized a lot, but the last 5 years it's actually moved back towards more central control, state domination and the like, and of course politically authoritarian more and more. Those are two very different systems, and these specific trade and economic policy manifestations that I mentioned are reflections of those different systems. So, as opposed to saying it's a matter of trade balance and the level playing field, I view it as a systemic clash, as I tried to describe in my remarks, which has to be dealt with in those terms. I don't think this administration is capable of conceptualizing or addressing that, but I think we're going to have to get to that point if we're going to be able to come to grips with the issue in a fundamental sense. So, it's a mixed bag. I certainly am not totally critical of China. I actually praise many of the things China has done. Much of its development strategy is brilliant, successfully executed. Obviously, the bottom line is fantastic. But with this big set of blind spots, as I would view it, which now that there's such a global power, jeopardize their own interests. And I'm hoping, praying, that they come to realize that in time to head off either trap and move towards something like the G2 to try to resolve.
We have time for two more. Yes.
In plain economic terms, China is faster replacing the United States Yes, sir. I was going to say, China is fast replacing the United States and Western Europe in Africa. And when I was having that chit-chat with you outside a couple of minutes ago, talking about rising powers, because I want to go back to that power equation thing, we had wars. But with the Soviet Union and the United States, we had a Cold War. Again, like I said, that was because we had a nuclear bomb. That changed the equation. Here's where I'm going with this. Is there going to be a Cold War between the United States and China? If that Cold War has not started yet, because I think if there's going to be one, it's going to be an economic Cold War this time. The rapid infrastructure build-up that China is engaging in right now, in Africa, in Asia, will tell me, if I may suggest, that that Cold War has maybe already begun. What's your comment?
I think it's very possible. I think Cold War, certainly the economic Cold War, and even a broader Cold War between the United States and China is quite possible. There are many people in Washington that want it, that want a new enemy, think it would be a great thing to have a new Cold War. There are more people who don't want it but think it's inevitable because they don't think China's going to change course. I didn't even talk about military stuff, the South China Sea, this kind of thing, where China's being very aggressive and violating norms in the security area that really do challenge America's global role. The Chinese think the U.S. wants to hold them down. The U.S. thinks, many in the U.S. think, China wants to take over from us. And to the extent those extreme views play through to dominate policy in both countries, you'll get a Cold War, or worse. You might get a hot war. That's why the stakes are so high. But you're absolutely right, very big risk.
Yes, sir.
I really enjoyed your talk and the model you presented, G7, G0, and G2. I just want to make a comment and ask you sort of on the G2 model. In your model, I assume that China is a totalitarian political system and going back to central planning and where a democracy and a free market. So if the G2 are cooperating to lead the world, I assume you're assuming that China is going to change to our model. But I don't really see the signs of that. It's still a party state. So the question comes back to the domestic issue of China. Is China going to change towards a governance model that the world, that the U.S. follows?
It's a absolutely critical question. But I do not assume that China adopts the U.S. model. What I'm groping for, and I use the word groping deliberately, because it's hard to figure out how to do it, is a way to reconcile the different systems, at least to an extent to keep the global order functioning in a reasonably effective way. And it's not so fanciful, because to some extent it's already happened. And China, as I say, has joined the world economy, as you know, to a huge extent, despite grumbling about a lot of the rules, which it had nothing to do with writing, but okay, it's accepted some of those, and it's used some of those at home to promote domestic reform. There was a myth in the United States and elsewhere around the world for a long time that China's joining the world economy would inevitably lead to political liberalization, democratization, and the like. As you say, it's clear now that's not going to happen. It's a party state, it's an authoritarian state, and it's getting more so. So the question is whether it is possible to reconcile different systems. I mean, I keep saying China's a global economic superpower, but it's the first time in history we've had a global economic superpower, which one, is still a poor country per capita income terms, two, is not a market economy in large part, and three, is not a democracy. Every other global economic superpower in history has been high income, democratic, market-oriented. No exception. Soviet Union tried to fail. Another example. So it would be historically unique if you could find a G2 or any method to integrate China into the system. And that's why some people are so pessimistic. And some people take your structure and say it's impossible. So we have to view China as an implacable threat, not just a challenge, but a potential enemy. And therefore, the right strategy is to stiff them and block them and attack them. There are many people now, including the current administration, that says it was a mistake to let China join the World Trade Organization 20 years ago. And we never should have let them in. We should have treated them like we treated the Soviet Union. Embargo them, keep them out, try to keep them down. Try to avoid their economic progress, because that underpins their military advance and the threat to us. It's still an open question. I briefed President Clinton in 1994 before the first summit of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, which began the process that led to the Trans-Pacific Partnership and all that 20 years later. And I briefed President Clinton on all this, and he asked the exact right question at the end of the briefing. He said, well, Fred, yes, you're right, we're going to do that, but how do we know? How do we know that the Chinese won't accept all this stuff we're offering, cooperation, integration, and all that? How do we know they won't accept it and exploit it? And he said 10 years from now, they'll say, bye-bye, don't need you anymore, we're on our own, see you around. Well, it's not 10 years, it's already now been about 25 years, 30 or 40 years. But he asked the right question. And the answer is, nobody knows you. And I don't think Chinese know. I don't think Xi Jinping knows. I mean, I put it in terms of his ambitions for China, the China dream coming sooner rather than later, national dominance. But I'm not at all sure that he has a cohesive, visionary strategy to achieve all of this. And so I think it's still malleable. It still can be shaped. And the policy, particularly here and there. That's why I worry so much, because if the U.S. is going to stay in abdication mode and attack mode, while China is continuing to rise, then you do have this potential. Spanish, which you have to see.
Well, for not only a fascinating presentation, but giving us the insight so that when we see events happen in the next couple of 3 weeks, we'll maybe be able to better understand which direction we're going. And so for that, we really appreciate it. And I would like to, on behalf of the council, present you with our traditional Jefferson stuff, which carries on a tradition actually started by Thomas Jefferson way back in Monticello when visitors to his home were given a cup that he personally designed as a symbol of friendship and respect that he had for the visitors. So,
Thank you.
and before we go, I do want to make a couple of announcements. This starts our program year for the World Affairs Council. We're cranking up next month, and we're actually opening the new Ziders American Dream Theater in Town Center, which is a beautiful structure if you've never seen it. But we're one of the first events that will happen there. And we're going to take a new tack and talk about the intersection between the arts and politics, especially having to deal with Russia and the challenges that the Russian ballet have in the era of Putin and the pressures they get from the political side of the house. So it's going to be an interesting presentation. And then in November, we're going to continue with our acclaimed World Quest knowledge competition, which involves the whole community. We'll have high schools, universities, and hopefully ODU won't win again this year. Because Norfolk State's going to challenge them, as well as my own team from Region is coming together too. But it'll involve teams throughout the community, the business community, and as well as our schools. It's a fun evening for all, and that's in November 15th. And then we'll continue on with our season with great decisions starting in January. So with that, have a great evening, and thank you for coming out. And if you want to listen to the interview that Dr. Bergsten had with Kathy Lewis just yesterday, it's on our